Hey there guys, today I'm going to take you along as I attempt to forge a Viking Age style anvil. So on your screen right now I'm showing some examples of roughly what I was aiming for. I didn't have any specific anvil in mind. I wasn't trying to make a replica of anything from a museum or anything like that, just trying to roughly make something in the style of Viking Age, Anglo-Saxon, Viking, and such anvils. So here we are, we're starting with a piece of wrought iron that is 1.5 inches square by just over 6 inches long. It's a piece of salvaged wrought iron I got from eBay a number of years back. And the first step is going to be to upset this, because I want something that is about twice as wide as that. I was aiming originally for something around 2 inches by, or 2.5 inches by 3 inches. I ended up settling for a little bit narrower than that. But you can see here I'm just taking my big sledgehammer and upsetting. Now the issue with using salvaged wrought iron is, like all wrought iron, you know, it kind of wants to fall apart and break apart at where any of the slag inclusions are, and so I started getting some cracks there, so got the forge up to forge welding temp, and here I'm using my smaller hammer to just close up those cracks coming in from both sides there. And so for the rest of this process I will go ahead and kind of forge this as close to forge welding heat as I can to prevent those cracks from forming. Whenever they do form, I go ahead and take it up to forge welding heat again and just weld them back shut. Now you saw there I used a little bit of borax on the weld. You don't actually need to flux a wrought iron weld in theory, but considering how big a project this was going to be, I wanted to take every little bit of insurance I could take, so a little bit of borax is cheap insurance. So now I'm pretty happy with how those cracks welded back up, so back to upsetting. You can see I got it much hotter this time. And it's just going to be a whole lot of that. I didn't show every heat of the upset, but just keeping it square, and then upsetting it more, keeping it clean, keeping it hot. Here I'm actually going to start forging the other end. The issue with upsetting this bar, obviously, is it's going to want to get thick on both sides, so we have to correct that since we want the bottom side of the anvil to be tapered, so that way it can go into a stump eventually. So taking it over to the horn to kind of quickly draw that back down to size. You see I keep swapping back and forth between the heavy hammer and the light hammer. That's simply because I'm not used to using the big 4-pound sledgehammer, so giving my arm a break every now and then really helps. Now forging that taper caused a little bit of fish lipping on the end there, so I'm just trying to forge that back in. Also just cleaning things up and doing a little bit of drop forging. Always good to stop and take a good look at your work and see how it's progressing, so I did that there a moment ago, and I'm just fine-tuning things before the end of the day. And there I'm checking to see just how close I got. I think right here I'm about 2 inches by 2.5 inches wide, or 2 inches wide, 2.5 inches long, I should say. So day 2 starts with working on the front and back transitions here. I wasn't quite happy how they were forming, so I'm using this makeshift top tool to forge them down. This will help smooth out and round off those transitions so we don't get any cold shuts, and it also helps draw down a little bit extra length. Now that top tool is actually the top die for my guillotine tool, which we'll see later in the process. I don't have a proper top tool of the right size, so you can see I just have some tongs that fit that size material, and I put a tong clip on so it's holding nice and tight, and it actually worked really well as a makeshift top tool, so there's a little tip for you. Alright, now I'm more satisfied with the face, and I'm thinking it's about time I start drawing this taper out a little bit further, because I want to taper it down to be under 1 inch in diameter at the tip. Beyond that, I wasn't too particular about the exact size, but I wanted it to be under 1 inch so I could use a 1-inch auger bit to make the hole in the stump. So, considering we started with 1.5 inch, and we've upset it a good bit since, it's time to really forge that taper down. And you can see here I'm doing so, just taking it to the horn, cleaning it up on the faces, knocking the corners off at a low heat, then coming back and repeat. Of course, we're going to get some more fish lipping, so we're going to knock that back down. Of course, I did it kind of at a low heat there, so that's going to cause some cracks, so back to a forge welding heat. Seal the cracks back up, square everything off. I'm not as worried about cracks at the very bottom of the anvil, since they won't really affect anything, just cosmetic, but best to clean them up whenever they form. There, I'm applying just a little bit more borax. Again, not necessary, but good insurance. Happy with how those sealed up. Just continue forging down the faces, trying to make them nice and square and smooth and all that. Checking it there in the hardy hole to see how close to size I am. My hardy hole's just around 1.25 inch. It's actually slightly under 1.25 inch. It's not perfect. So I can gauge how close to that inch I am by just how far down into the hardy hole it goes. Here I'm coming back with that tool again. And you can see I have a little, another stump anvil actually sitting in the hardy hole. That's just there to keep the actual workpiece from dancing around the whole anvil as I try to forge those transitions down. Alright, so I decided on what I wanted to use for the face. Originally I was having trouble deciding, but I chose this piece of 1045. It's 1 5/8 inch diameter, and I cut it just over 3 inches long. I chose that for a couple of reasons. The main reason was, after weighing the anvil as it was, I wanted something a little bit heavier. It was only around, I think, 3 pounds at this point, and I wanted to add some more material. So having the biggest stock that I could to add a nice big chunky face and horn would help with that. So that was the main reason, but it does have the side benefit of, compared to the other steels I had at my disposal, this is a simple carbon steel. It's a kind of a medium carbon steel at that. So this is actually, in a way, a good analog for the kind of steel that they would have actually had access to in the Viking Age. Compared to some of the more advanced alloy steels that I had at my disposal. It was between this or some 4140, really, and at the end of the day, this is what I chose, and I think it was the right choice. Here you can see I'm drawing it out, trying to get it to be 2 inch wide. And day 3 starts pretty much the same as day 2. I'm back with this top tool again, forging down these transitions, trying to clean them up. They were a little bit trapezoidal in shape, so you can see I'm coming in and knocking it back square, and then going to clean it up some more in the next heat. Just kind of went back and forth to try and square that up as best I could. I did end up having a little bit of a lump I had to deal with later, but for the most part it was good enough. There you can see I tried to use the cross beam of my hammer as well, but just wasn't happy how that was going, so went back to using the top tool. It just was working that well. Back to forging the 1045 billet. It was almost to size on the last day, so I'm basically just truing it up here, getting it to that final size. I didn't really have good tongs to hold this with. These pickup tongs I'm using here are actually a little bit too, it's a little bit too small for them. Alright, so here I'm attempting to cut in some teeth in the billet. Now these are supposed to be there to help you hold the two pieces of material together in the forge to get them both up to forge welding temp to weld them back together. Ended up giving up on this idea though, because I was really fatigued at this point and it just wasn't going very well, so went straight to wire wheeling the two pieces, got them nice and clean of all the scale I could, and got them down to as close to bare metal as I could. Then I just took my Viking Age authentic MIG welder and put a tiny tack weld in one corner. And here you can see I'm smothering it in borax. We're going to stick that in the fire and get it up nice and hot. Now, I didn't get it quite hot enough on this first attempt, and dropping it actually revealed that. You see it opened right back up. So more borax, kind of spilled more than I needed, but this time I got it up to forge welding temp, and just with some light little tippy taps, we set the weld. More borax. I was really nervous at this point, so trying to use everything at my disposal to ensure this goes through. So keeping it good and clean, covering it in borax between every heat. And then one of the things I realized pretty quickly was that my little forge was only really able to get 1/2 of the anvil up to forge welding temp at a time. So you kind of could see that there. And so I ended up having to kind of weld it one section at a time. So I'd go kind of one face at a time, or one side at a time. Focusing right now mainly on trying to get the top forge welded in the center. Then you'll see I'll start doing these transition bits. You can see I got it nice and hot, and I'm using the fuller tool to kind of help set that weld as well, right where I want it. And I do continue forging even past a forge welding heat just to thin down that transition, because I was still not quite happy how it was looking. So I was hoping I could thin it down a little bit more and forge weld it in a little bit better, blend it together a little bit better. So you can see I'm just kind of thinning it down there, looking at it, sticking it in the fire, trying to forge weld it. Not sure I got it quite hot enough on that heat, but just back and forth. Here I'm working on the back side as well, doing the same thing. Just a lot of back and forth here. Now that I'm happy it's welded together, I'm starting to forge that taper back down because we did upset it a little bit. Also trying to square things up, knock the corners off, make it look nice and smart. Looking for my brush, which of course was on the floor. And we're going to give it a nice, good hard scrubbing. Get rid of as much scale as we possibly can there. And into day 4. Now I started out by doing a little bit of filing off camera. I filed off some of the little troublesome areas there on the transitions I wasn't happy with. And so we're cleaning those up a little bit. And then we're going to do one more pass of forge welding heats to really try and forge weld them in. I didn't get the front side quite as blended in as I really would have liked. It never ended up looking quite as good as I wanted it to, but for a first try, I'm pretty happy with how this came out all in all. See here, again, I'm doing quite a lot of work on that front side trying to get that blended in. There, I'm just kind of smoothing everything out to see how the welds look. And now we're going to start forging the horn. So we're knocking the corners off with the big sledgehammer. Trying to help prevent fish lipping, but I'm not sure it did. Then we're working with the small hammer to do kind of the same. Also flattening it out on the side of the anvil there. Again, taking a forge welding heat to try to blend that last little bit of that transition in. Now trying to figure out a good way to do the offset, and of course the best way is the guillotine tool. So here's the proper use for that top die. If you don't know what a guillotine tool is, here in a second I'll change the angle and you can see it a little bit better. But basically it's just 2 top dies, or 2 identical dies, fullering dies in this case. And I'm just knocking in some identical fullers on both sides of the horn, and then coming with my hammer and kind of knocking down the peaks in between, so that way it all evens out. So there you can see better the 2 dies there. They're both just simple radiuses, nothing complex, and I flipped it back and forth so that way I could forge both sides of the anvil. And then just knocking down those fullers with the hand hammer. Here I'm knocking off the corners as well. Still struggling to find a really good way of doing that with the hand hammer. Taking it to the horn to kind of smooth out the transitions. Here I'm actually using the bottom die of that guillotine tool as a little shelf, just to help support the rest of the anvil as I forge down that horn. See, I was getting a little bit of concavity there from forging the horn, so after knocking off the corners again, I'm going to start taking it to the face quite a lot and trying to forge it back flat at the face. Then, after all that, it was time for grinding, so I did a little bit of this at my belt grinder, but the belt grinder started acting up, so then I went to files and hand sanding. And I was actually really happy with the result I got from 220 grit on this little palm sander. It looked really nice. So, getting everything smoothed off. I will say I probably should have radiused the side edges of the anvil a little bit more than I did, but that's always something I can go back and do now that it's finished. Here I'm just slowly heating it up, trying to get a nice even heat, and this kind of shows the issue I was having. Tiny little forge gets totally filled up by this anvil, so trying to heat both sides of it was really difficult because one side would always end up being kind of in shade of the burner to the other side. So just kind of moving it around, slowly rotating it in the forge. You can see the tapered end is starting to heat up here, so I'm flipping it over to the side so that way the back side will start heating up. Then once it got a nice even heat, I just set it on a brick to slow cool, and this normalizes it, kind of evens out all the stresses and such in the steel, makes the grain structure stronger, and I did that 3 or 4 times, I can't remember exactly. Then it was time to quench. And this was a make or break moment for this little project. This point, it is either going to become a nice hardened tool, or it is going to become scrap metal. If the welds fail here or anything like that, then, you know, it's not really salvageable at that point. So I'm super stressed. As you can tell, it's already nighttime. It's about 9 o'clock, so I'm sure my neighbors were real happy about this, but I'm just trying to get a nice even heat in the forge. You can't really tell on camera what the temperatures are because of the lighting. But just trying to get it nice and even. I've already checked it. It was above non-magnetic. I'm checking again just for sanity's sake. But into the water. No loud pings or dings or any kind of noise, so I'm pretty happy at this point. Now I will say in the future, if I make another one like this, I think I would quench it in brine to get just a little bit more hardness out of it. But I tempered it at 450 degrees, and then it was finished with beeswax and linseed oil, which is a traditional finish, and here's how it looks, and I'm quite happy with it overall. The welds could have been blended in a little bit better. On this side it actually looks pretty good. I mean, you can tell where the two pieces are, but you know, they don't look like they're gonna fall apart or anything, but on the front and back they do have a little bit more of a cold shut, which was unfortunate. There you can see that nice satin finish that the 220 grit left. I was really chuffed with that. And then I took this thing out the very next day, even though I was a little bit sore from a hand injury I got while doing the grinding on this anvil. But I went ahead and tried it out, so here it is with a stump that I've just got strapped to my vice stand and my little Viking Age style hammer, and I was really pleased with how this ended up. Again, I think I could have gotten a little bit more hardness out of it if I had quenched in brine. I think I would have been maybe a little bit happier with the hardness then, but overall, I'm super pleased with this. And yeah, I hope you'll join me for future projects. Thanks for watching.